Welcome back, everybody. It is Monday night. You see three beautiful smiling faces. Actually, both of you guys are wearing some sexy RotoHeat gear. We're back to talk defense. We're giving you defense. We're giving you hot and heavy, the big uglies in the trenches. We're going to be talking defensive line. We're going to talk D tackles, D ends for fantasy purposes. Some of these rookies that may be of value. Again, before we go too far into the weeds, this is early in the process. Some of these guys may just be guys that we like and may never become fantasy relevant, but we're hoping to give you some options to choose from that may become fantasy relevant. We'll see. Don't hold it against us if we're wrong. I blame Paul. Gentlemen, good evening. It's good to see you again. Kraig, how you doing tonight, bud?
Hey, my day was rather uneventful. Paul had a very, you never know what you're going to get on a Monday, but I can't complain. And to Paul after a fun start for you.
I love the fact that we're starting late because I want to throw my laptop outside and just never see it again. That's always fun when you use it for this and this only. But, it's Monday. Monday sucks. It is what it is. You live, you learn, you move on.
It seemed like a lot of folks had a case of the Mondays today, that's for sure. Work all day today. People work just the dumbest possible things were going on. I mean, the basic things you think should work with technology, people were having trouble, and it was like, all right, I'm ready for this day to be over. Let's just get it done. And it brings us to this moment in time. We're going to have a little fun tonight. We're going to be talking about some players that probably, for you offensive guys in the RotoHeat community, you probably just don't care. But one day, I'm hopeful that you will join us on this journey into the mouth of IDP madness, if you will. So we came up with a list of guys we want to talk about. I'm going to let Kraig lead it off because Kraig did a great job of putting together the list in our group chat today, where I was slow to the party because I was busy fixing the dumbest possible problems. So Kraig, why don't you get us kicked off with the guy you want to talk about the most, and we'll just kind of bounce it around and have a fun little back and forth. And if you have questions, throw them in the chat. We'll answer them. It doesn't have to be defense. It can be offense, whatever you want to talk about.
Guy I want to talk about the most, throwing it up there. I don't want to play favorites here, but we can start with the guy that Paul, I know, has thoughts on, and he got me looking into more. And he won't be the first Nixon to win in Iowa, but Daviyon Nixon, I really like him, and he has a chance to be, a really high draft pick in this draft class. There's sort of, from what we've discussed, we feel not a lot of top tier sort of defensive linemen this year. We'll talk about one of them later, top guys that you see throwing around a defensive end. There's a lot of hit and miss potential at defensive end. Defensive tackle, there's a couple guys and then a whole bunch of dart throws. But I think Nixon has a real chance to be the top guy taken. He started out at junior college, and he ended up going to Iowa for a year where he just tore it up this year. I mean, the guy's got a clear drive to succeed and prove himself. He only has that 1 year against the Division I sort of level talent, which we'll have to see how that plays out in the NFL. But he got better as the year went on. He's crazy strong, and he just has that top-tier athleticism to go with it. So he's really high. He's my top-rated defensive tackle for this class, and I know you have him near there, if not there too, Paul.
Yeah, I think he can be a 4-3 tackle or a 3-4 end. I remember I wrote that he's got effort issues, and then I watched the snap again and went, wait a minute, he's 304, and I'm expecting him to run from behind somebody that's 204. It's like, no, he's just fast and scary. Huge fan of his. I mean, he's not the first Nixon that can, make or break a situation for somebody. That's your one per list, and not all criminals are the same.
I didn't mean to steal your thunder with that. You didn't tell us your one per show ahead of time.
I didn't have a backup on this one, so I'm just kind of rolling with it. On the pass rush side, he gets home. And it's not always consistent, but he he's got moves. He can get up the field very, very well. The one issue I did see was with hand placement and hand fighting. He's got issues and consistency with getting off the offensive lineman, but when you figure out that he was only at the D1 level for one season, look out. He's got sky high upside. I fully expect him to be in the top 10 and maybe 5 overall selections. He's just got that high of a ceiling. Um, and the athlete is just there when you watch it. I'm sky high on this guy.
Yeah, I was wrong. He was at Iowa for 2 years. It was 1 year
Oh, sorry.
of JUCO. But yeah, I mean, this past year to go from 1 year of that to, you know, not doing a whole lot his first year and then just being a unanimous, I think it was All American this year. I mean, that's just crazy improvement. And I know it was academic stuff. It wasn't why he couldn't get to Iowa to begin with, but that just shows he had the drive to get there and he put it together and just exploded. What do you think, Brad?
Well, and so especially on the defensive lineman, I like to well, like when we're doing any of our prep, we look at different scouting services and we kind of build the full picture of a player. So with the defensive lineman, you try to look at the position they're going to play or potentially play at the next level. So you had mentioned defensive end and defensive tackle. A lot of places that I saw um, thought that he would project well to a three tech. And for those that are watching or will watch that don't necessarily know what a three tech is, think of a player like Aaron Donald or Geno Atkins. Those guys played the three technique position on the defensive line as a defensive tackle that also can wreak havoc and get upfield. Nixon definitely profiles, I think, really well to that. I think his burst is the thing I like about him most. Like, so when you're thinking about those defensive tackles that get pass rusher fantasy points, those are guys that need good bursts that can get through the line really quickly and get after the quarterback. I think Nixon can do that really well. I think of all the defensive tackles that I've looked at this year, he's the only one that's got a burst that I think could really translate to a kind of a penetrating three tech that gets you some sacks and really helps you from that angle as well. So I agree with you guys. I mean, I haven't necessarily put my board together. I've kind of started playing around with who I want where, but Nixon I think's got to be at the top of it just because of some of those things you can't teach. The explosiveness of his physical attributes. I think is you just can't match that in this class, especially. I think it's a weaker defensive tackle class anyway. You have a lot of 3-4 nose tackle guys in this draft, I think. But he's really one of the true kind of penetrating up the field D tackles. He could play defensive end. I mean, he's got that kind of athletic ability. I hope he doesn't. I think he would do better suited in a 4-3. But what do I know? I don't get paid by the league to do scouting, so that's just my hope. What do you know? So yeah, I agree with you guys.
From an actual draft perspective, it's not like someone can sit there and go, all right, we pick 5, 6, 7, 8. Can we wait until 12, get this extra third or fourth, and say, all right, well, it's only 3 4s between us and who we're going to trade with. I can easily see somebody who plays a 3-4 move up and go, you know what? We're playing them at 3-4 just because of the athlete. Watch this.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not saying I think he would probably be a little bit fantasy wasted there, but if somebody wanted him from an actual football perspective there, okay, I get it.
Well, and our boy Jason in the chat said Mike Zimmer loves his three techs. Vikings pick at 14. So that I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, think of like Sharif Floyd and some of those guys that had some fantasy relevance with the Vikings for a little while. I think he's a better athlete and would fit better in a system like that. Fortunately, the Vikings have so many needs that I could see them going
Yeah,
offensive line. I could see them go defensive line. I mean,
and also Floyd got hurt. You can't. Well, I think he had a heart problem. You can't hold
no,
that
that's not
over
his
him,
fault.
regardless of how ineffective he was his first year and a half, because that's a mulligan anyways.
Mm-hmm.
That's not
Nope,
his fault.
absolutely.
As much as I want to rip on him for being in Florida and my fandom, no, I am not holding that over him in any way.
So Daviyon Nixon is a guy that you will want to keep your eye on. Is really ultimately what we're coming back to. So if you've been watching our YouTube channel for any length of time, we've been doing rookie scouting profiles and things like that. And I mentioned whether or not these are guys that you should keep an eye on. This guy in IDP drafts will probably be one of the top defensive linemen taken. Now, obviously, we need to preface that by saying, know your league, know your league type. If you play defensive tackle leagues, he's probably a guy that you're going to need to draft higher. If you're playing a league where it's just kind of like a flex, where you have like a defensive lineman, he's probably not, getting drafted. Maybe even, late in the draft is the earliest kind of thing. So you just have to understand your league type.
Tackle specific, he could be super high just on positional scarcity.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So Paul, I'll give you second, and I'll go third. Who's your next defensive lineman you want to talk about?
All right. The only other D lineman who I think has a shot at the top 10 is Carlos Basham, Wake Forest. I believe he's a 4.3 end, but at 285, it would not surprise me if somebody in the 3.4 says the same thing. Hey, you play end, and we like your size, your speed, and the upside. But he can play all over the D line. If you want to shift him inside, excellent. I don't know if I'd play him at the pure nose, but he's got the athlete in him for it. He's just somebody who, when he was out of high school, he wasn't thought of that highly, but he's one of these few. As he got larger, he got faster, and that is a super scary combo because there's just something in the DNA that just works. I remember thinking the same thing about JJ Watt. Well, he can't get faster as he gets bigger, and sure enough, it happened, and he's going to make the Hall of Fame because of it. But if you watch the Clemson film from this year, it's got it all. He faces linemen basically every snap, and he's still mildly effective despite facing Clemson skill twice. It's just he gets home a lot off the edge. He knows how to use his hands. I think the floor on him. I believe he's a 4-year player. Yep, 4-year player, and he produced all 4 years. You've got a sky high floor and a sky high ceiling out of him. So I saw the acceleration out of him. Just he's light years ahead of where he should be at his weight. Are you guys as high on him as I am?
Kraig, I'll let you have the first crack at it.
I don't know that I'm as high on him per se, but I agree about the floor of the guys that we've sort of looked at, the defensive end, sort of what we're calling for tonight anyway. The dozen or so that we've dove into. The combination of floor and ceiling that you discussed, I agree with. He's a smart, hardworking guy. You're not seeing him give up on plays and just dog it because, offense, but you're on Wake Forest in some of these games, you're just getting destroyed. He's still out there performing and trying, which some of these guys have found out sometimes you go to an NFL team where you're not going to be in that position to win for several years, and you still got to go out there and put your best foot forward, or you still should be anyway. The thing that I saw that he needed to improve on, I thought the most, was versatility as a pass rusher. But that's something that they're great at teaching at the NFL level, especially if you want to learn and put the effort in, which it seems like he does. I don't know that he has a chance at a top 10 pick, but, given what we know right now, I certainly see him as a mid-first round pick, and I think he'd be an asset to pretty much any team he went to.
Yeah, with Nixon, the thing that I loved was the explosiveness. I think Basham is a little lacking in that area, but I think he projects well as a defensive end that goes after the passer. Because what he struggles with in explosiveness, and I don't want to say struggles with, but is kind of the lacking in my mind. He makes up with good hand placement. He knows how to take better angles and beat the guy off the edge. So I think at least that's what I've seen so far with him. I still think he's probably one of the better ends in this draft class. For fantasy purposes, definitely. I think he's a guy that you'll want to target. The nice thing with a player like him is I don't necessarily know. I don't know that he's a high first round pick. If he is, then he's going to shoot up your draft board. If he isn't, I think he's got enough long term upside and appeal that you could draft him, stash him, and let him develop and become one of those nice high end defensive ends in year 2 or 3, something like that. Um, I don't know. I'm not as high on him as everybody else, but I think he's got a nice long term outlook. I like the size. I like his speed, overall speed. It's just the explosiveness off the line. Like that, when I'm looking for a guy who's pass rushing, I want to see that. I want to see you just explode off the get off. And I just didn't always see that with him. Doesn't mean he doesn't. I just felt like I didn't see it enough to feel confident, like I did with Nixon. Nixon, I mean, that was like it was constantly. I mean, that dude was just on fire. But yeah, I like Basham. I think he's a guy that you could target. If he goes in the early first round, though, you're gonna get stuck overpaying, and that's gonna drive me crazy. I'd let somebody else bite on that one.
All right. Well, who is your guy here, Greg?
Okay, so in the chat, y'all threw up all the names, so I'll just pick one of the actual names that I put, and it's not going to be any of the names other than Quincy Roche. Quincy Roche is a guy that I think, much like Basham, could develop into a really nice edge rusher. The difference with Roche is I don't know if he's going to be a 3-4 outside linebacker, and if so, I I think that hurts his value a little bit. If he's a guy that somebody takes as a 4-3 edge, I think that gives him a better value. What I like about him, he's very quick. His body control is very good. I think he's got really strong flexibility. I think he does a good job having more than one move to try to beat offensive linemen. He's not just a swim move or a bull rush. I mean, he has a little bit of variation to what he can do. So he's got a lot of different things that I think are intriguing. I don't think he's the most polished product. I think he's better than Rousseau coming out. Both of those guys were on the same team for a little bit there. I think he's a better prospect coming out. I think he's more ready to step in and make an impact. He's a guy I would target. I think he's probably more like a day 2 pick, somewhere second, third round would be my guess if you were putting my feet to the fire to say where he was getting drafted in the NFL draft, that's where I would go. But again, if somebody uses him on the 3-4 as an outside linebacker, I don't know how I feel about that. Unless you're in a league that it's just an edge position. If you just have that edge position, if you're using, say flea flicker or something, then whatever. Take a chance on. Paul, what do you think about Roche?
I thought he was really smart when he played. He knows who he is, and he knows that he doesn't have much power, and he plays to it. If he's not gonna make his way home, he's gonna get wide and just make as many tackles, or he's gonna make the running back head in odd angles. He's just really smart. He's got speed, but I just don't see a counter if he doesn't get home off of it. I thought he was more of a third or fourth, but if somebody thinks they can put him in a weight room and hold the speed, yeah, maybe he goes in the second. But I guess if I were a GM, I would want more upside than him, but his smarts just show.
Absolutely.
He's there. If he knows he's getting awesome, if he knows he's not, he just makes himself wide. makes the play. Like, really smart player.
Yeah. Craig, what's your thoughts, bud?
Yeah, I mean, and even with an edge position, if we're talking for fantasy, I think he has more value if he's a defensive end and you're sort of 4-3 because I don't see him staying on the field as a coverage guy in some of those plays where you'd want an outside linebacker to still be on the field. That's not his forte, clearly. And if he goes to one of those, I think he's going to be a specialist, which limits his upside. He could still be relevant depending on who he's across from, how much he gets to the ball, because we've seen those guys in limited playing time, especially towards the end of the year once they get their feet wet, make a name for themselves. But I think he's more of a stay away, like you said, even if he is an edge and you're playing one of those leagues, because I don't think initially he's going to be playing enough to be worthy of a draft pick. And you can probably get him as a free agent later or cheaply through a trade if you think he's going to start coming on. I had notes on here too. Smart player, knows how to use his abilities. He has a nice floor, I think, but his upside is really going to depend on which format he goes into. That said, like you, Brad, I like him more than Rousseau in that I think he has a better floor. And if you're some people, I used to be one of those guys. I probably still am on offense too much that loves to just go for the home run swing all the time and miss all the time. Not all the time. Miss 75% of the time, we'll say, on those sorts of guys, wide receivers specifically. Stephen Hill, I'm still holding out hope for you somewhere. But yeah, I don't see that with Roche. That's more of his counterpart in Rousseau. So in that sense, I agree with you, Brad.
He may be with Manziel in the whatever league that Manziel's in now.
This is the XFL.
No, Manziel's in that
armchair, fan league.
Yeah, fans choose the plays or whatever. Like,
just whenever you can say this is the XFL and
Oh.
the Nasty Boys, you take
He
advantage.
just wanted to do the Vince.
They're coming back next year, so we're gonna get crack some 2022 XFL card boxes someday.
No
boys.
way.
I've done it twice.
I have a complete set of the original XFL cards, Brad. If you wanna, fork some cash over for those Dino, whatever his name was, autographs I have.
Make it rain. All right, Craig. Who's your next guy? Who do you want to talk about next?
I'm gonna go back to a guy that I don't think you guys had as much as I did, and as I was talking about upside, he fits within there. But I have Christian Barmore, who, he hasn't been lights out for Alabama, and sometimes I think it's hard to stand out on those sort of defenses. But I see the ability, and you're talking about that initial burst. I see him having that too, Brad. He's going to be someone that probably not going to be drafting in fantasy right away, or if you have a taxi squad that you can stash a defensive guy on, you might want to, because I could see him growing into the role a lot more. But he's a developmental guy that will probably still be drafted decently high because he has that upside, sort of in that same sort of position, that three technique that you had mentioned. I don't see him on the level of Nixon right now. I know there are places that have him as the top defensive tackle, but someone that I really like that I think could have high upside for you long term if you can get late in the draft or free agent stash somewhere. I really like him, and I wouldn't be surprised if he snuck somewhere into the end of the first round. I'm not saying it will happen, but the Alabama pedigree, what he showed on the field when he did play, I could see it happening. Paul?
Okay, yeah, this is the first one that we're going to have a major disagreement on here. Pass rush, I thought he was overly reliant on the swim, and I think that the O-line figured it out. Running wise, I think he got just shoved out of the way very often for me. And the fact that he suffered a knee injury, which I wish I had more specifics on it, but don't. I actually think he's more likely to head round 5, 6, or 7 than round 1. I did not like him at all. If the NFL says, hey, you're a 3-4 end because of your size, and we think we can have the the player that they recruited versus the one that actually showed up. All right. But I'm just not behind him at all. But I know I'm in the minority on that. Brad, what do you think?
So
You're the tiebreaker, Brad.
well, yeah, I'm not going to be a great tiebreaker. I was, while you guys were talking, I was trying to go through and evaluate, just guys out in the communities, mock drafts, looking through some of the NFL guys, as well as TDN and some of these other places, and a lot of them have Barmore going in the kind of the later first round. Some of them have him with like the Jaguars' second pick. Basically everywhere that I see, he's going to a 4-3 defense in theory. He does seem like a more developmental 3 tech. I definitely think he's one of those guys that could develop, but it's tough in Alabama because those defensive linemen. I mean, think about, I've been burnt by enough Alabama defensive linemen, in Detroit with, the Ashawn Robinsons of the world, where it's like, yeah, they may work at the college level, but it seems like when they get to the NFL, there's just something about them that just doesn't translate well. I haven't seen a lot of Alabama linemen that have really, for fantasy purposes, been super exciting. So I like Barmore's athletic profile. Big kid, what is he, like 6'5", 310, 315? I mean, for his size, if he really is a 3 tech, I think he could develop nicely. He's got a nice athletic profile. He's just not somebody that I think is going to be highly drafted in fantasy drafts unless you're in defensive tackle specific leagues. Then I could see him being a later draft pick. But even that, I would stash him and if I had to, but I'd probably look elsewhere. With as deep as this draft is, with some safeties and some linebackers and things like that, he's probably not going to be high on my list. But I think there's something there. I'm just not like insanely excited. But because it's such a weak defensive tackle class, I mean, there's value there. It's just not like an insanely high value. So I'm not really on anyone's
Generally
side.
speaking, I mean, yeah, defensive tackle isn't somewhere like we've beaten into the ground this episode already, but unless you're in a defensive tackle specifically, you're generally not drafting a defensive tackle, period. There are exceptions to the rule, of course, but consistently, if you look at year to year to year, it's not the same defensive tackles unless you're Chris Jones or, Aaron Donald. Different sites, of course, label these people differently, which you got to run into. So, yeah, you're probably not, but that's why we break these down between defensive tackle and then your edge defensive end. Generally speaking, the guys that.
Uh-oh. We lost Kraig completely. And he was saying such riveting information.
It shows him as being froze up for me too.
Well, that's unfortunate, Kraig. When you get back, you'll be there. We'll put you back on. While we're waiting for Craig's technical difficulties to get resolved, we do have a question. Not relevant for this season, but what are some of y'all's thoughts on Bryan Bresee? And I will say, truth be told, I have him in my Pinnacle of Devy League, which is my extremely deep. I think we're now in round 125 of Devy drafting. I drafted him. I'm very high on him. He's the kid from Clemson. I think he was like a 5-star defensive end that came in last year. Did pretty well, in his playing time. I'm huge on him. I think he could really develop into something nice. What do you think about him, Paul?
My only concern is I want to see his height, weight, speed once it's all over. He came in at like 6'2", 285, and I don't know. I guess I just want to see what he finishes at, so I can say, okay, you're a 3-4 end, or you're a monster 4-3 end. I want to see how he finishes, or does he finish at like 3-10, and he's playing the 3 spot inside for a 4-3.
Well, and he, I mean, yeah,
he's got monster upside, but I just want to see where he finishes out after like college weights.
Well, it'll be interesting to see because I know in his freshman season, uh, he really was one of the top guys nationally when it came to pressure from the interior spot. I mean, I'd have to look, but I know he had more than 20 pressures from the interior spot, and he was touted as like one of the best defensive ends, but Clemson was using him all across the line. So I definitely would agree. He could be in any of those positions if he can keep the explosiveness and add, a little bit more bulk. I could easily see him being, a three tech like we've been talking about. If they keep him on the end and the edge as a defensive end, I think that just makes him even more valuable. His freshman season, 23 tackles, 6.5 TFLs, 4 sacks, 2 passes defended, and an interception. I mean, the kid's freakish athletic, so it's what you want.
He's he's one of the few ends. Actually, I'm gonna preface this by saying every season out of high school, there are between 0 to 3 kids that you look at and say, if you were in the NFL, would you not look awful on the practice squad? He's one of them. And you're saying this about a high schooler. I'll just leave it there.
He's pretty intense. He's definitely a guy that would be smart to target.
Yes. I mean, especially we want to see where he ends up, but if he winds up at 300 even and he's tackle specific, yeah, I'm highly interested in the tackle specific format. Highly interested. Let's see here. Do we get our friend here back?
Kraig, you back?
I don't know what's going on. We've been dealing with our internet provider, and clearly they're not liking us tonight. So
no, that's okay. You're back, and that's the important thing. So we were just talking about Brian Breesy in the chat on Facebook. Bryce is asking about our boy Bryce is asking about Brian Breesy, the defensive end tackle for Clemson. He's a freshman defensive end tackle. I don't know how much you. Craig's like,
I'm out of my league in there. I don't want to comment on something I don't know about.
No,
so.
and it was funny enough. He's one of the guys I drafted in the Pinnacle draft, and I was super high on him. I think if you looked at like 247 or Rivals, he was like one of the tops in the nation in the class. I mean, like he was kind of the cream of the crop, and Clemson got him. So,
and it showed. It showed. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. His freshman season at Clemson, I mean, he was all over the field, had an insane amount of pressures, and even playing in a short amount of games, he didn't play a ton. Jaws, smart target, sounds like a. Oh, that's funny. Nice, Jaws. Well played. Okay, so where were we when Kraig dropped? Oh, Kraig was dropping us some defensive tackle knowledge, and we totally missed all that good information he was giving us.
Who were we on? Who were we discussing?
I think we were on to you, Paul, because he had just talked about. Or no, are we? We might be back to Kraig now. We got
that was his
Barmore. Yeah. So where do you? Because he had Barmore.
Yeah,
Barmore. That's right.
So it's on to you, Paul.
Did you want to talk about the Michigan man first, or should I select somebody else here?
You can talk about him. I don't care.
All right.
I do love me some Michigan football players.
Which one?
Kwity Paye, although Hutchinson's he's legit also. Yep. Paye, I'm not overly sure of the spot he played or the spot he ends up at. He's a little undersized at only 275-ish. But they played him inside. I said this before, I don't know how old he is because he had some issues from when he came over from Africa. So we don't truly know how old he is. Again, that's a file it in the back of your head thing. I can't prove it. I'm just throwing it out there as what I've heard. But he can if you don't know what his size is, you play him on the edge, you're fine. You play him in the middle, you're fine. You play him on the other edge. He's got all of it. I thought his hand fighting was nice, but he does have to work on the mental aspect. But when you figure out that he only played high school football for like a year or so, it starts making more sense that he can't necessarily see it immediately. But he's got huge upside. It would not surprise me if someone selects him in the top 10 overall. It wouldn't surprise me if he falls to like 45 because of the age thing, and you're not necessarily sure what spot that he fits. And if you're in a 3-4, I'd be more concerned because I don't know if you miss on him at playing end, he doesn't have another spot. He slides. If the 4-3 squads decide, hey, you're a little light, he might really fall. But what did you guys think of him?
He's another one that obviously he's from Michigan. He's great. Like I love Michigan football players. They're just amazing. And our boy Joe Kidder in the chat would probably agree with me. He's a Michigan man too. When I look around at the different scouting services and the mocks again, this guy feels like a Raiders pick. Like you slide him on the other side of Cleveland Farrell, or you kind of have him maybe mix in and have some spot snaps, and I think he probably is going to be a 4-3 end. If he lost weight, he could be a 3-4 outside linebacker. Like he's 6'4". If you could drop him down to like 15 pounds, even take another 15 to 20 pounds off him, he could be a 3-4 outside linebacker, which I think is not a terrible thing for him to do if you're a 3-4 team and you take him. I can't see him playing end for a 3-4 team though. He doesn't necessarily. I mean, he's just a little undersized for that. So when it comes to being a 4-3 defensive end, I think he's got enough explosiveness. He does a good job with his hands. He can do a lot of different moves. I think he really does add an extra dimension to your end room if you have him in a 4-3. Fantasy wise, I think he will probably get overdrafted just because people are super hyped on him. But I think there's other ends in this class that are going to be better producers for fantasy purposes. Maybe even Aidan Hutchinson, quite honestly. Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, not to go to the other guy, and not to throw an insult at the colleges here, but I see Hutchinson as a poor man's Cam Hayward, and I know that's sort of some school rivalry stuff there, but I see him as similar makeups, similar sizes, and to be honest, Cam Hayward is a completely fine defensive lineman. If you've had him on your team, generally, like we said, you don't do the whole 3-4 defensive end and expect great success, but he's been really just solid there for the past 10 years. I mean, you haven't been playing him that long, but been in the league for 10 years now, and he's just a pro's pro where he's not big and flashy in terms of his plays, but he gets it done. He produces. And that's what I see, to a lesser extent in Hutchinson. I don't see Hutchinson being a first-round pick here. And Paye, it's sort of like what you guys said, where I just don't completely know where he fits, and that makes it harder for fantasy. And even if he is like a 4-3 on someone like Dallas we had talked about before, or, with the Raiders, even as a Dallas fan, that doesn't excite me with, how much – and we'll see what the new defensive coordinator is going to do. But, even with Nolan last year and before that with Marinelli, with how much they rotated guys, it was hard to get a guy that you really trust unless you had a big name like, Lawrence for one of those years in the air. And Raiders, you've seen some production, but Crosby had a great year and then fell off. And Farrell, it's like he flashes it, but is he going to put it together? And I kind of see him like those guys where, yeah, he could be great for you one year, but I don't know if consistently you're going to want to be starting him. Could he be a fine defensive end 3 for you? Sure, but I wouldn't, with what I see now, be comfortable putting him out there weekly. Well, that can change as you progress.
Right. Well, and remember, if I remember correctly, Aidan Hutchinson's returning. I think he chose to go
Oh,
back.
is
Yeah,
he?
I think so. I'd have to
Okay.
verify, but if I remember correctly, I thought he chose to go back to Michigan for another year because the COVID policies they let basically everybody do whatever they want.
I thought he declared.
He might have. I last I'd heard, I thought he didn't, but that doesn't mean he.
Yeah, it looks like he said he's
Yep.
going back.
You are correct, Brad.
Oh,
So
huzzah!
we have to wait a year, but we'll see what changes between now and then. But that's
I don't. The tough thing is I don't know if that does him any good because I still cannot stand that Harbaugh is coaching that team. You know, Don Brown was probably the most successful defensive coordinator we've had in quite some time, and what are you going to replace him with? I mean, like I don't. If I'm a player like Paye or Hutchinson or some of these guys that have some appeal, I don't know that I would want to go back and do what? Get beat on by everybody in the Big Ten again because your team's coaching is brutal. I mean, obviously, I have many things I could say about Michigan football right now, but I don't know what they're doing.
you didn't lose to Ohio State this year, though. So
Ha ha!
take that.
I would rather play and get beat on than have them put their tail between their legs like they did. Like that was disgraceful.
You want to hear one of the funniest numbers from the 2020 season? Mike Norvell is undefeated against Clemson, Miami. One game they got canceled, and the other one the SEC said we're going conference only. Undefeated, baby. Yeah.
I'm glad 2020 football is in the books.
Hofstra's undefeated too for 2020. Remember that.
Well, when does spring college ball start up? There's a couple of what division was that's going to be doing spring ball here soon?
Last
Was
weekend,
it last?
Deion Sanders is undefeated.
Oh, was it Jackson State? Isn't that who he's coaching?
You know, other than the fact that he had some items get taken from him, and then they didn't, and then they did, then they didn't, and
You got to keep it interesting.
I don't know. I just laughed and went to work and came here. Didn't get too involved in that one, although he is my favorite to ever play.
Deion, Primetime's the man. You can't knock him. He's nothing but entertaining. That's for sure. Okay, so I don't necessarily want to talk about this guy, but he's a name that people all want to talk about, so we have to talk about him. Gregory Rousseau, defensive end Miami. I'm just not like he needed to play another year because I don't think the 2019 tape is sexy enough to get him drafted where people are mocking him. Like people are mocking him as like top half of the first round, and it's like where? What did you see? I mean, yes, he could develop. He's got physical skills, but he's insanely raw. Like both of the defensive ends from Miami, other than him coming out, I like more. You know, Jaelan, Phillips, and Roche, I think have a better floor at least at this point. You know, he's got the size, he's got the athletic profile, but there's just so much there that concerns me that for fantasy purposes, I'm not touching him. I would let somebody else take that shot. Kraig, what's your thoughts on Mr. Rousseau?
So, to quote a more famous Rousseau, the world of reality has its limits. The world of imagination is boundless. And I think that latter part is what people are seeing with him. And to liken it to something more sports related other than, like philosophy. I think people will get that whole Giannis thing going. You saw it take over the NBA, and I think you're seeing that sort of with him where this guy, if he hits, could just be lights out amazing. And they're letting their imagination in fantasy run wild about, oh, my God, did you see him this 1 year in college? And it was amazing. It's like, hold your horses. Like you said, this is 1 year in college. He was raw then. He hasn't had any more playing time since then to, prove himself or refine stuff. And you can only do so much, like we hear about these quarterbacks and passing drills all the time. It's really easy when there's not a defensive lineman in your face and you're running drills on the field by yourself. It's the same sort of thing when you're training. We know he has the skills. Is he going to be able to put that together at the NFL level, at a consistent enough level to be on the field and not only get you those sacks, because sacks are great, but you have to be doing the rest of it to stick on the field with the team. I don't see enough like you to prove that he's going to be able to make it like that. I'm not wishing that he doesn't, but you all right there,
I'm watching the Facebook chat, responding to you waxing intellectual.
Hey, we're trying to broaden our horizons here by getting people into IDP, and that it goes for other areas of your life too. So, if we can throw a little other intellect in here besides the fantasy football relevant stuff, we've done our part for the world. But anyway, since I've waxed poetic enough according to Facebook, how are you feeling, Paul? You'll be more blunt than I will, I guess.
Well, that's why you get the one per show. We get to, expand your minds on it. But anyways, you don't like him, and if you watch the show that we had Shane on over the summer, I hated him then. I still hate him now. When he plays tackle,
you mean Rousseau, not Shane, correct? I was just clarifying who we're talking about.
Shane's not in the NFL draft.
I don't want ambiguity.
Shane's not in the NFL draft. Yes. Rousseau, when he plays tackle, he runs himself right out of the play. He is just not smart. And I don't know if he can play end either, because I need a D end to set the edge, and he's constantly looking at just making the play. The only way I can see this working out is if he plays the 4-3 and he plays the 3 tech, where he can basically say, okay, I'm just going to use what I think is going to happen, but he runs himself right out of the running lane. He's frustrating. He uses his hands well, but then he can't get underneath the linemen to move them either. I honestly think the guy's going to end up in round 5, 6, or 7. And others think he's going with the 5th, 6th, or 7th overall selection. He's a player I will not own in any of my fantasy leagues, even if he ends up tackle specific.
I think he's too underweight to be a D tackle. What is he, 260, 265? I mean, that's really, really light. I mean, he would really have to put on probably 25 to 30 pounds and still keep the explosiveness. That's a tough one. That would scare me away at least to start. I would let somebody else take that grenade.
Yeah, watch him for any series. He will run himself right out of the lane at least once every possession. At least once. Or he just gets shoved over, and I do not see this at all.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Bryce. Bryce says over on Facebook, I like how you guys look at and note intelligence in these college players, because that gets so overlooked when it comes to transitioning to the NFL. Athletic ability gets you to college. Football IQ will get you to the NFL. True statement.
I think we said it last show. I mean, to me, he's Dante Fowler, where I think he's going to get drafted too high, and he might have one great year that gets him paid or something, but I don't see him maintaining that throughout his career, just based on what I've seen for really 1 year of film. I mean, there's more than that, but he had the one big year that is what drawing people to him.
Yeah, I think I haven't really tried to figure out what I like or where I like him to land position wise, but I'd be interested to see him as a 3-4 outside linebacker. I don't know how well he'd do, but I think he would have a better chance for being successful because, just like some of the things you guys mentioned about him overrunning plays and doing some of that stuff, if you put him back an extra 3 to 5 yards, maybe he doesn't overrun plays so often. Maybe they just have him set the edge and try to crash and get you some tackles and do some run stuff. I would like him to be successful. I mean, I like his athletic profile, but there's just so much that concerns me that I will not be putting any chips on him unless he's free. And even then, I may not even do that. Because there are, when you go down this draft list, there are some guys with some characteristics that I think are intriguing. Jayson Oweh from Penn State. Ossai from Texas is intriguing as a freemium type guy.
Well, let Paul talk on him if you're giving Ossai some credit. Paul's the
Well, no, I
opposite
know
end of
Paul
that
doesn't
for
like
him.
him, but if I'm going free and I'm putting a chip on guys, these are guys I'm putting a chip on before I'm putting a chip on Rousseau. Like, that's where I'm
Okay.
at. I'm not saying I'm like super high on any of these guys, but if I'm throwing a chip on the table, I would go after these edge guys over Rousseau. Even Patrick Jones from Pittsburgh, I think there's some intrigue there. You know, uh, that's probably the longest short. There's quite a few guys down the list, but it gets pretty ugly.
I'm not sure if you guys have this guy listed as a D end, but I think that there's a legit shot that Hamilcar Rashad ends up in the first round.
I love him.
Just like I said, I don't know if he's listed as a D lineman, but he's an edge, and I don't know if that's a separate show, but just his combo of speed and power along with the hand usage, I can legit see him as a fantasy asset, and he might be edge eligible despite being 240-ish. He could be a real fantasy asset, but if he's not edge eligible, well, sorry, you're not a fantasy asset.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he goes because isn't he only like 6'3", like 250 something? He's really in a weird size.
He's not even that.
Is he even smaller?
Yeah, he's not even
Yeah,
that
so
much. He's even smaller.
he might get his athletic. He's one of those guys where the athletic profile is insane. Like I love him as well, but I just don't know where he's going to go. If I remember correctly, he is mocked as kind of a back end of the first round, early second round type guy. So fantasy purposes, I love him. I just don't know what to do with him.
If he's a 4-3 Sam, he's off the fantasy list. If he's a 3-4 edge, squarely on the fantasy list.
Yeah, I don't hate that. Definitely Sam. Stay away from Sam's typically.
Well,
yeah, you really have to be insanely talented.
You're not going to be playing Will at his size.
No,
if he's in a 4-3, it's going to be at Sam.
Probably.
We do have a question in the chat, and I just wanted to clarify for one of our Canadian friends. DE stands for Delaware. So if you have a question about what we're talking about, this is all Delaware-specific knowledge. So,
gotta love those. This is why people love the Monday show. You never know what you're going to get on Monday. You get the one per show, you get the Socrates of RotoHeat, and you get our state quiz. There's that's going to be the fun thing about this draft class. There's a lot of defensive ends that there's a lot of guys that could be defensive ends that could be 3-4 outside lines. Like it'd be interesting to see what the NFL actually decides with these guys. Hamilcar, Rashad is one of those that
Hannibal.
He's an intriguing prospect.
He's a Hannibal. He
is.
Watch the movie.
He is a Hannibal. So it's 10:30. That's it. I appreciate you guys hanging out for the evening. Bryce and Kidder and Rob and Jaws and Jay and all you guys. We love you guys. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us. We're gonna keep the rookie conversations going. Thursday night, Paul and I have been doing some mocks. Obviously, last week we did round 1 of a Superflex. We got to get to some round 2 guys for Superflex and do a 1 QB as well. So we're gonna keep this rookie content going. So if you guys are looking for rookie content, hit the like, the subscribe, the notification icon. If you're on Facebook, go to YouTube. Because you'll support us better on YouTube. So go to YouTube and like, subscribe, do all those things. We thank you guys. We love you. We appreciate you. RookieDraftGuide.com, RotoHeat.com, all the places for all the great rookie content. We will talk to you again next Monday.